At the transplant house, the staff was just so wonderful. Hannah and Steve, they made us feel like we were family.
McCoy has been immune suppressed for 5.5 years. It's extremely important to not pick up external viruses. The transplant house provides you the opportunity to control your immediate environment.
Looking for housing during a time of medical need, especially for your child. Having a place like the transplant house takes the burden off you to worry.
Hi everyone, I'm Larry Wynn, President of the Transplant House Board. I'd like to welcome you to the 11th year for the Transplant House fundraising party. And the first year, we are introducing the virtual Soiree. As you all know, the Transplant House has relied on our spectacular annual fundraiser for many years to help further the mission of the organization. And wow, it's always been quite the party. And though we can't gather in person this year with sushi bars and live bands and tap dancers, the people of Transplant House, led by Executive Director Nora Duffy, still came together to make this evening happen. And we want to share these heartfelt messages from our guests and staff with all of you. And of course, we are relying on all of you to help meet our fundraising goal of $100,000. We hope you're inspired this evening and find it in your hearts to give, whether through donations or purchasing some of the gorgeous artwork we have for sale. As you can guess, there are many moving parts to running Transplant House, but the bulk of the funds raised through this event goes to apartment rents, purchasing furnishing and supplies, cleaning services and hospital-grade cleaning supplies, a critical resource during the pandemic in order to keep our guests as safe as possible. Your donations also provide rent subsidies for those who don't qualify for Medicaid but find Seattle's rents out of reach for their budget. We are incredibly grateful for the support that enables us to fund those subsidies that eliminate the financial barrier for many of our guests. With that, I'd like to introduce Shaniqua Manning, a friend of Transplant House and a communications leader and former King 5 news anchor.
Good evening, and thank you for inviting me to be a part of Transplant House's virtual Soiree 2020. When I first heard about Transplant House, I was inspired by the cause and even more motivated to bring this virtual event to you all so that we can continue the important mission of this organization. While many families are physically separated due to the global health crisis, transplant recipients are always waiting for the call. They need the confidence that when that phone rings and it's their turn, they can find comfort and safety in their environment before and after surgery. I will never forget when that phone rang for my mom. After several false starts, it was her turn to receive the lung transplant that would improve her quality of life. Fortunately, she was able to get world-class care just an hour away from her home in New York City. But that's not the case for so many people who travel great distances to receive life-saving transplants, treatment, and follow-up care here in Seattle. It's a journey that gives them a new lease on life, but can also come at great financial sacrifice for patients and their families. Well, here's Larry to explain more about how our virtual fundraiser works.
That's exactly right, Shaniqua, and that's why we are relying on all of our donors to help. You will notice during the presentation that we have a fun thermometer tracking your live donations so everyone can see how we're doing during the evening. Transplant House is providing you several easy-to-use tools during the evening, and beyond that will allow you to give freely and easily. You can also select to set up a recurring monthly gift should you choose to do so. Many of you have been very generous in the past in your support of Transplant House, and we're hoping that generosity will extend to this year as well.
Speaking of generosity, we wouldn't be able to make tonight possible without our event sponsor. So please join me in thanking Sound Community Bank, Tuxedos and Tennis Shoes Catering, Integrated Talent, Adrian Kreft, Emma Jones, Barbara Karshmer and Des Whitchurch, Larry and Susan Wynn, Dr. Frederick and Chrissy Jackson, and Grand Image, which is hosting our virtual soiree. I tell you, I'm so excited to try that gourmet meal from Tuxedos and Tennis Shoes. All right, so what can you expect tonight? Well, you're going to hear from people involved with Transplant House in many different capacities, from former guests to community partners, staff, and board members. We'll take you on a virtual tour of the Transplant House apartment so you understand exactly what your donation can help to provide. And throughout the event, you can check out the art store online where we have more than 100 gallery pieces for sale, courtesy of Grand Image. We're all so grateful to all of you art lovers out there who add to your collections during this fundraiser every year. 50% of the proceeds from art purchased through the art store are donated to Transplant House. And later tonight, we'll announce the winners of our Chihuly glass drawing and some other great prizes, including a trip to Hawaii and a big screen TV and more. That'll happen at the end of our event tonight, so be sure to stick around for that. Now, throughout the evening, you'll see us call out various ways that you can donate to help us meet our $100,000 goal. We've tried to make it pretty easy for you. This year, you can text to give. All you have to do is take out your cell phone and text TH Seattle to the number 44321. Then you'll receive a link to donate any amount you wish. You can also give directly on our website at your convenience, or click to donate right on the event page next to the video screen and watch that thermometer rise. All right, let's get started. As Larry mentioned, Transplant House is a home away from home for transplant and immunosuppressed patients and their families who need an extended stay housing option close to hospitals in Seattle while they wait for a life-saving transplant or treatment, or while they're recovering. And the mission of Transplant House is to provide affordable, convenient, and safe housing for transplant patients and for patients who are immune suppressed or immune compromised due to transplants or other medical issues.
It's a small but mighty team that fulfills this mission every day, and we want to extend a huge thank you to Xiaoling, Hannah, Steve, and Nora, who keep the Transplant House organization running. On behalf of the board of directors, we appreciate all the many things you do. Thank you.
Let's hear from Carly as she shares a moving story about her son Brandon and their ongoing battle to treat his disease. Brandon is a brave survivor, and we're grateful that Transplant House was able to be there to support his family. Here's Carly.
When Brandon was born, he was very healthy, but very quickly he got sick. And we ended up at the hospital. It took a while to figure out what was wrong with him. And we were lucky to have a very good doctor, Dr. Brand, who figured out what was wrong with him, that it was an immune issue. He was diagnosed at a month old with a disease called chronic granulomatous disease, which pretty much means he was born missing some of his immune system. And we did okay for the first, I'd say, 4 years or so with the disease. He had issues, definitely, but it became apparent that his quality of life was going down, and it wasn't at a level that we wanted for him. So we researched a bone marrow transplant because we knew that was one of the options that you can have to cure his disease. And so his doctors reached out to Seattle Children's Hospital and SCCA, and we started down that journey. And the hard part about being in Alaska is we don't have a lot of advanced medical care. Deciding to do a transplant in Seattle, which was very far away from us, thousands of miles away from our support system and everything, and housing, it was really scary. And when Brandon and I first went down there for transplant, we were spending $3,000 a month in rent during the workup part of his transplant. And then I found the Transplant House, and I applied, and we got an apartment just very soon after that. And that was so helpful for us because it gave us a more stable, a more cleanly place to get him through transplant. We ended up being in Seattle for from April of 2019 until January of 2020. And during that time, I decided I couldn't keep my full-time job. So that was also rough on us. And then after we got back, Brandon was doing great, but that slowly went downhill. He got very sick and kept getting sicker and sicker. We found out that he had to go back to Seattle. And so we were medevaced down there, very short notice. Again, thousands of miles away from our support system. And it was, we were so lucky again that we got back into the transplant house, which we stayed for another couple months while the hospital and SCCA helped cure his graft versus host disease, which we are still fighting today. But especially being so far away from home, I really don't know how we would have done it without the transplant house. The facilities were wonderful and clean, and being a mom of a immune-compromised child, it is very important to me to have a place that I can trust to go to. And that brings us up to today, where we're not out of the woods yet with the graft versus host disease issue, but his graft is still holding up fine. So we'll see what the year brings. We're hoping not to have to go back down to Seattle, but if we do, at least we know we still will have the option to go to the transplant house.
Thank you, Weehee family, for sharing your story. Such a great example of how Transplant House has touched this family with their support and care. All right, now Larry and I can talk all night, but we want to invite Jesse Giordano, Senior Director of Real Estate and Property Operations at Seattle Children's Hospital, to join us. In addition to managing the apartments at the Allegro building in the U District, Transplant House also has a contract to manage 11 apartments at the Burke and Union building, also in the U District, on behalf of Seattle Children's Hospital. This location is specifically reserved for Seattle Children's Hospital patients. Jesse's going to share more about the critical relationship between Seattle Children's Hospital and Transplant House.
Thank you, Shaniqua. You know, all of us are learning how to deal with this new reality of face masks and social distancing and having our lives turned upside down in ways we didn't think were possible. Now, imagine for a moment you were going through this alone, in a strange city with little to no resources while the world carried on without you. That is a small glimpse into the life of a transplant recipient. It's quitting your job so that you can be close to the hospital. It's selling your house to pay for medical bills. It's putting everything on pause and waiting, hoping, and praying that a donor comes through to save your child's life. Last year, Transplant House and Seattle Children's Hospital partnered to add 11 more apartments to the housing portfolio. And thanks to Hannah and the team, we've housed 54 families as they wait for life-saving care. And we are growing that program every year. Your contributions help ensure that these patients, these little kids, are exactly where they need to be at exactly the right time. It is a lot of work, and it costs a lot of money. But that's why we get together every year and throw an amazing party, giving what we can to ensure Transplant House has everything it needs for the next year. Help me turn this shared experience of COVID-19 into the best fundraising year Transplant House has ever seen. Thank you.
Thank you, Jesse. Well, after hearing from the Weehee family and Jesse Giordano, I hope you're starting to get a glimpse of the vital role that the Transplant House apartments play in the health and recovery of our guests, and how cleanliness and functionality are crucial for these patients. All right, well, now we want to take you on a virtual tour so that you can understand the direct impact of your donations. And get ready to click in lieu of our paddle raise tonight. Remember, every donation helps. Well, that was a lot of fun. Remember all those ways to donate: text, click, Amazon Smile, and more. Well, we are so honored to have Alan Christenberry, a transplant recipient, share his story with us. Transplant House became one of his family's support systems in recovery. Here's their story.
I had a transplant in December of last year, 2019. Actually, my liver transplant was on Christmas Eve in 2019. What led up to my transplant was I had a stage 4 liver illness. My cirrhosis of the liver eventually turned into cancerous liver. I had 5 cancer tumors in my liver, and I got to the point after going through radiation and all kinds of procedures that I had no other choice but a liver transplant. And after my transplant, my wife and I were required to stay in the Seattle area, and we had researched places to stay prior to making any arrangements because we knew we had to stay in Seattle 90 days after my transplant so they could observe me and make sure that everything was okay as far as my blood work and my liver functions and kidney functions. Well, ultimately, after doing our research, we found the transplant house online. And we had stayed at a couple of other places in Seattle, but they just were not like home. I mean, it was just more like being in a little motel room. Some of them were not really that clean, and we decided to check it out. And we were very impressed with the transplant house, and that's ultimately where we made our decision to stay. It was really beneficial in my healing process, especially the first 90 days, because I was really emotional and I didn't want to be away from home. My wife was lucky enough to be able to work remotely at her job from Seattle and at the transplant house. And we really enjoyed the comforts of home at the transplant house. I mean, it was a self-contained apartment unit that we stayed in. Wonderful. We had the washer and dryer. We had a full kitchen, a bedroom, living room, nice TVs in both the bedroom and the living room. So it was kind of like our little home away from home. So we felt safe going in and out of the transplant house and just had a sense of security. But most of all, what we appreciated, and I get a little emotional when I talk about this, was all of the help we got from Steve and Hannah, the staff at the transplant house. They really went above and beyond to not only help us when we needed help with some clerical work and making copies to send to our insurance company, but just helped us feel at home, and we really appreciated that. So I would say that if there's anybody in need of a place to stay after their transplant, that the transplant house in Seattle is definitely the place to go. I'm grateful to be alive, and And I'm very, very grateful to the Transplant House. And I thank them and will always be grateful. That's pretty much my story, and I thank you all.
Thank you, Ellen, for sharing your story. Such a great example of how Transplant House has touched this family and such an inspirational result. If you saw on our tour, we had some commemorative plaques hung in the apartments recognizing our donors who have made significant contributions to help fund these apartments. $5,000 for the bronze level, $10,000 for the silver level, and $25,000 for the gold level. Thank you so much.
What a thoughtful touch and a beautiful way to recognize those donors. Well, we're nearing the end of our program, but please stay with us because our next video message is from one of our most ardent supporters and a past Transplant House guest, Jeff Granville.
I was living in Anacortes, running a boatyard with 27 employees, taking care of many of my high-end customers with, $500,000 to $5 million boats. And when the banks collapsed in 2008, we moved on to a sailboat, and we were raising a young daughter, and then became expecting with my youngest son, McCoy. It was my journey with McCoy that ended up bringing me to the Transplant House. My son, McCoy, 4 years old, became ill, and my ex-wife, now his mom, Jody, took him to the Colville emergency room on a Saturday because he had swelling around his eyes and in his face. And they thought it was a local virus and too late for antibiotics, so they sent him on his way with a prescription for Benadryl for the swelling. And she had brought him to my house on the farm right after Christmas for my vacation with my kids. And I decided to take a trip to Anacortes from Eastern Washington on our farm to visit my mom in Anacortes. He had been sleeping most of the way, but when we got there and I laid him down, I noticed he was struggling to breathe. He was breathing really shallow, like a kid with a fever, but he did not have a temperature. So the next morning I took him into our local doctor and they did an x-ray and thought he had double pneumonia. But later that evening, the radiologist had routinely looked at the films and said, no, he doesn't have double pneumonia. He has a chest mass and he needs a CT scan immediately. So the next morning, I drove to Seattle Children's Hospital and went through the emergency room doors. That was December 30th, 2014. And we still have not been able to move back to our farm. Within an hour, they had done a lab draw and his white blood cell count was over 400,000. And they said he has leukemia or lymphoma. So we went through the normal process of chemotherapy and radiation leading up to a bone marrow transplant, and everything was going fine. And they gave him a medicine called tacrolimus to prevent graft versus host disease. And he had a toxic reaction to that medicine, thrombotic microangiopathy, where his T cells are reprogrammed to kill every red blood cell in his body. The carcasses of those red blood cells plugged his kidney filters, and he was on dialysis for 27 months. He qualified for a transplant, and we had been living at the Ronald McDonald House for 3.5 years during his journey with leukemia and journey to wellness. And as grateful as we were, it still lacked the privacy of a private home. You were like in a hotel room with 2 queen beds, and you'd have to go down to the shared kitchen where 64 families shared 8 kitchenettes. I was very grateful to be there, but it was really, really hard to function while you have a 4, 5, 6-year-old child who's very, very sick, and you need to leave them every time you go to the kitchen to make juice or food. So when we found out that we qualified for a transplant, we were told of the Transplant House, and that was an option for us. And I had never heard of it. And I just was amazed and really, really thankful, grateful that there was an option. And qualifying for the transplant and being able to move into the transplant house was an amazing revelation for us after 3.5 years to have a fully furnished, fully supplied apartment, clean, nice apartment with in-suite laundry and a kitchen where I could prepare their meals and medicine without having to leave their presence. And that is really the amazing gift that was given to us from the transplant house. And we were able to live there for 7 months during kidney removal in November and then a kidney transplant in December, coming up on 3 years now. So it was a major transition, caring for my son and then transitioning to the transplant house where we could be more of a family unit and have our privacy and be all self-contained. And we're extremely grateful for that. And it's been a real, a lifesaver is a cliche sometimes, but in our case, it's literal. So I have very much gratitude for the entire group, and I'm more than happy to do anything I can to support their efforts.
Well, our evening is coming to a close, and we hope that you've enjoyed the presentations, and fingers crossed that next year at this time, we can all be together again, but in person. Well, let's close the evening with tonight's drawing winners. Thank you to everyone who purchased tickets in advance. And to help with that, let's bring on Hannah Jones, our housing director.
Thank you, Shaniqua. Good evening, everyone. My name is Hannah Jones, and I'm the housing director at Transplant House. I am very excited that you all are here joining us this evening for our first ever virtual soiree. And now, without further ado, I will announce the winners of tonight's drawings. First, we have our Champagne and Grey Goose package, valued at $1,000, compliments of Grand Image. And the winner is Melody Miller Fleckenstein. Congratulations, Melody. And now we have a 70-inch LED 4K HD TV, valued at $1,100. And the winner is Thomas and Judy Curran. Congratulations to the both of you. Now we have a 7-day, 6-night trip to Hawaii in a luxury condo with spectacular ocean views valued at $4,500. Special thanks to Barbara Karshmer and Des Whitchurch for their generous donation. And now the winner of the Hawaii trip is Amber Leone. Congratulations, Amber. Now, the final item of the evening is this beautiful Chihuly Sahara basket set by famed local artist Dale Chihuly, valued at $7,500, generously donated by Grand Image. And now, the winner of the Chihuly glass is Kate James. Congratulations to all of the winners this evening. We will be reaching out to you in the next few days regarding package redemption instructions. I personally would like to extend my gratitude for your continued support throughout the years. Transplant House is an organization that is near and dear to my heart, and we truly could not operate successfully without your continued support. And for that, I'm extremely grateful. And now, back to you, Shaniqua.
Well, congratulations to all of our winners. That was super exciting. We hope you enjoy your prizes. For all of us at Transplant House and the communities we serve, thank you for joining us tonight. We appreciate your generosity in helping us provide quality housing for our guests. Have a wonderful evening. And again, a huge thank you from all of us.
Shaniqua, thank you so much for hosting and giving the support to Transplant House. With your generous support, we will continue even in this time of pandemic to provide a safe haven at Transplant House for those in need. Thank you again.
Seattle's own Josephine Howell, a Transplant House supporter, performs All Rise Up.
For those who take a walk with me to live back in our history, all rise, to face the past that we must dread, to use our strength and lift our head, all run, All rise up, please stand up. When will we rise up? Stand for those who fell for us, live for those who died for us. When will we rise up? For those of us who walk with me, to live back in our history. All rise, to face the past that we most dread, to use our strength and lift our head. All run, to face the past that seems so near, to conquer all our hidden fears. All rise up, please stand up. When will we rise up? Stand for those who fell for us, live for those who died for us. When will we rise up? When will we rise up? Stand for those who fell for us, live for those who died for us. When will we rise up? When will we rise up? Stand for those who fell for us, live for those who died.